I'm joined by New York Times columnist Jamelle Bouie. Jamelle, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You were here as part of our continuing conversation of the 100 most significant political movies of all time, taken from New Republic's list. You're here with number 5, Birth of a Nation from 1915. Every first question about Birth of a Nation is too big to answer in one question, but how do we reconcile all the things that are happening in this 3-hour and 11-minute film?
I mean, that is itself a very tough question. I think that when watching Birth of a Nation and trying to understand it, the most important thing to have going into it is just a sense of the political context of 1915. This is a year where sectional reconciliation between North and South is a big deal. There are 50th anniversary of the end of the Civil War events being held
across the country.
Civil War veterans still very much alive. The first Southerner is in the White House in a generation, that's Woodrow Wilson. And the country is embarking on this project of what you could call kind of a consolidation of its white identity, immigration restrictions, the rise of Jim Crow. Jim Crow at this point is still pretty new in the South. It's about 15 years old. And so Birth of a Nation comes on to this field, this cultural field in the United States, where its images and its message is ready to be received. It is a film in a lot of ways that is about the reconciliation of the white North and the white South.
When you say its message was ready to be received, what message are you referring to?
In my view, its message that the basis of American civilization, as they might have described it, is sort of the dominance of white Americans over the entire continent, and that the story of the Civil War and the story of Reconstruction in particular in this vision is a story of a terrible mistake being made by giving the former slaves any kind of political authority.
I mean, it's really that this is not the result of modern woke culture. Like, this movie was objectionable to hundreds of thousands, millions of people in 1915. Same as Gone with the Wind in 1939. There were people in 1939 who were like, please don't make this movie, Mr. Selznick. And this was very clear to some people in 1915 that this was a very, very aggressively racist film.
The NAACP, numerous black activist organizations around the country all rallied to try to get this movie taken off the screens. They recognized in the moment that this movie wasn't just inflammatory, but dangerous. And one of the legacies of Birth of a Nation is it likely inspired the revitalization of the Ku Klux Klan. The original Ku Klux Klan, which is the subject of the film, emerges in Tennessee in 1868, 1869, and by 1875, it's basically gone because of federal action. And it's dormant. There's no Ku Klux Klan for decades. And then it reemerges in Stone Mountain, Georgia. The man who founded the Second Klan explicitly looked to Birth of a Nation for its iconography, for its image of itself. And it's not an accident that this very popular movie, perhaps the first blockbuster, this Second Klan would not just be a smattering of a few tens of thousands of people in the South. It would be a national organization with millions of members and a real political heft throughout the country. And that is a legacy of Birth of a Nation that the critics recognize that this is a thing that could produce something as dangerous as that.
Recognized at the time.
At the time.
Yeah, I mean, because as you're about to see, the Klan here, they are the undisputed heroes of the movie. They save the South and the dignity of the South. And in the process, of course, this part of the rehabilitation that you have written about very eloquently of the lost cause of the South in general, that it rehabilitated the Confederacy, right? Which is a process that is still happening in America, right? And this was a big part of that. Is that's not being hyperbolic, that Birth of a Nation played a big role in that?
Not at all. Movies, cultural products have real power in our society, in any society. And a movie that was this, not just inflammatory in its message, but like technically impressive. People had never seen anything like this before. So you have this spectacle on screen with this very potent message coming at a time in the country where a lot of people are ready to hear it. We should expect it to have a huge impact on how Americans, white Americans in particular, understand themselves and their country.
And part of that first question I asked you about reconcile all the things that this is, you mentioned it. The movies were I mean, they weren't a little bit shorter. They were much shorter. Two reelers. These were 18, 20-minute films. And here's a 3-hour and 11-minute epic. Close-ups, dissolves, all sorts of things. This is an intensely emotional picture. It's hard to understand how much of an impact this had, what message this sent to Hollywood, this burgeoning little film community, of what they could do. Because technically, it's an incredibly impressive film. And then content-wise, it's repulsive.
That is maybe the most insidious thing about this movie, that because of its technical brilliance, because of its real emotionally powerful storytelling, it's one of the most influential films, period, ever made. And that is tied up very much in its message. The two things can't be neatly disentangled.
Jamel, that's great information. I knew it would be. We'll talk more after we see the film. Here it is from D.W. Griffith in 1915, re-released in 1921. This is The Birth of a Nation. I'm back with New York Times columnist Jamel Bowie. We've just seen The Birth of a Nation. It is a difficult watch, especially knowing that it was presented as historical fact, right? And some things they got right, like I presume Ford's Theater, right?
Right.
And like the way the South Carolina legislature looked. And of course, it had this gigantic outsized impact because it was such a groundbreaking film technically.
Right.
From the battle sequences of the Civil War, the grand scope, and then just the 3-hour and 11-minute runtime. This is a 9-act masterpiece, technically. And then it's got all these gigantic problematic parts to it.
There are African-American critics primarily who are saying this movie is inflammatory and it should not be released. But sort of mainstream critics, you might say, we're hailing it as a masterpiece. And it took some time in terms of its reception in popular culture for the African-American critique to really begin to break through and treat this movie for what it is. But at the time, it was, hailed as maybe the only American movie that really qualified as art, precisely because of the elements that you described. The sheer scope of the story, the melodrama, the technical proficiency. I mean, the battle scenes still look remarkable. They look like Matthew Brady photographs from the Civil War.
And taking just a few hundred actors and making it seem like there are thousands involved. I mean, it's obviously skillful. You mentioned before the film that this was the infancy, the first 15 years of Jim Crow in the South. I mean, and there's a scene right at the end, just that quick moment where black people on election day are intimidated into not voting by the heroes of the movie.
This is the goal.
Right.
This is what we want, the film says.
Right, to retreat fearfully back into your homes.
Right.
And don't come out.
The first kind of suffrage disenfranchisement of Black Americans en masse had really begun in 1890 in Mississippi, but really spreads at the end of that decade. So I think by 1902, most southern states had restricted suffrage for Black Americans, also for many white Southerners as well. That old part often gets left out. But in the context of the film, it's what we just saw in real life 10 years ago. We wouldn't have had that without the Klan. And the Klan is an important part of establishing, you might say, law and order in the South now after Reconstruction.
You've written very eloquently about sort of something else that has happened that the movie played a big part in, but really part of the idea of the lost cause of the South and the Confederacy. Robert E. Lee became seen as a hero to many Americans, and Ulysses S. Grant, who beat him, as sort of a drunken failure and a blemish on late 19th century American history. But that is a naive look at both of them, who were both very complicated men.
Our evaluation of those two men is very much tied up in where we are in our history, and that it's not an accident that Grant's reputation begins to rise in the 1960s and 70s, after the Civil Rights Movement, as a new generation of historians are looking back at Reconstruction, beginning to reevaluate what is kind of the popular consensus around that period of time. And likewise, right now, Robert E. Lee's sort of reputation has declined precipitously, right? Statues being taken down, more scholars looking into Robert E. Lee as a slaveholder, Robert E. Lee as someone who is very much defending this institution. So Birth of a Nation comes at a point where the lost cause is already in circulation, and this movie cements it in popular culture, such that when we get to Gone with the Wind, that depiction of the South, that depiction of the antebellum America is kind of standard for many Americans. It's sort of part of the culture. Ideas about how Americans behave, I think this film kind of seeded and helped saturate. The idea that there's something maybe fraudulent about predominantly Black areas voting, that an idea that we've seen in circulation very recently in our own politics, is something that's very much a part of this film, as we mentioned. And this film is super popular. This film is again a blockbuster, and it shapes people's perceptions about this country, about their fellow Americans, about what race is and how it operates, and all these things. That's what makes it so influential beyond its technical achievements. It is this powerful piece of, I don't think it's an exaggeration, propaganda
it is propaganda.
For a racist conception of the United States.
Jamel, this has been educational, certainly for me. I hope for our viewers too. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, it's been my pleasure.
Jamel is done for the night, but the movies, of course, continue here on TCM, and they are uncut and commercial free. So stay with us.
Next on TCM, Lincoln, then Malcolm X, and later, Primary. Conventional wisdom says, stick with TCM tonight.